There are moments in life when everything seems to stop, when opportunities dry up, when income disappears, and when the natural flow of provision seems completely cut off. It is in these moments that questions begin to rise in the heart. How can I give when I have nothing? How can I expect provision when there is no source? But what if the very foundation of those questions is built on a misunderstanding of how divine provision truly works? What if provision was never meant to be tied to a job, a salary, or a predictable stream of income? There is a higher system, a greater law, and a deeper truth that operates beyond what the natural eye can see. And when this truth is understood and applied, it unlocks a flow that no economic condition can stop. God has never been confined to human systems, and He has never depended on an employer to meet your needs. The moment you begin to think that your job determines your supply is the moment you unknowingly reduce the limitless power of divine provision down to a paycheck. A job can be taken away, a business can slow down, opportunities can disappear overnight, but none of those changes have any effect on the true source of provision. What you see in the natural realm is only a channel, and channels can change, but the source remains constant, unshaken, and unlimited. Many have trained their thinking to believe that security comes from stability in employment, but real security has never been found in something that can be lost. True security is rooted in something eternal, something that does not fluctuate with markets, economies, or human decisions. When you understand this, fear begins to lose its grip, because you are no longer depending on what can fail. Instead, you anchor your trust in what cannot be shaken. There is a higher system at work, one that does not operate by resumes, interviews, or economic conditions. This system responds to faith, to obedience, and to alignment with spiritual principles. It is not moved by the absence of a job, and it does not slow down because of lack. In fact, it often begins to manifest more clearly when natural options are removed, because it forces a shift in dependence from the visible to the invisible. You may find yourself in a place where there is no steady income, no predictable flow, and no clear direction in the natural sense, but that does not mean provision has stopped. It simply means the channel you were used to is no longer the one being used. Provision is not drying up. It is redirecting. And if you are only looking for it to come the way it used to, you may miss the new ways it is trying to reach you. The challenge for many is that they measure provision by familiarity. They expect it to look the same, to come the same way, to follow the same pattern. But divine provision is not limited to repetition. It is creative, it is unexpected, and it often comes through paths that the natural mind would never consider. When you remove the limitation of thinking that a job is your only source, you open yourself to possibilities that go far beyond human planning. You must guard your thoughts carefully in seasons like this, because the mind will try to reason based on what it sees. It will try to convince you that without a job there is no way forward, but that is a natural conclusion, not a spiritual truth. The truth is that provision does not begin with a job, and it does not end with one either. It flows from a source that is unaffected by layoffs, downturns, or closed doors. When you begin to renew your mind to this reality, something shifts within you. Anxiety starts to fade, and confidence begins to rise, not because your circumstances have changed, but because your understanding has. You stop chasing opportunities out of fear and start walking in expectation. You stop seeing yourself as lacking and begin to see yourself as positioned for a different kind of supply. It is in this place that faith becomes active, not passive, not wishful, but active. You begin to speak differently, think differently, and respond differently. You refuse to let the absence of a job define your situation, and instead, you define your situation by the unchanging nature of your source. And when that becomes your foundation, you are no longer shaken by what happens around you, because your confidence is no longer tied to it. Tithing has often been reduced in the minds of many to a simple financial transaction, something that is only possible when there is a paycheck, a profit, or a visible increase. But that understanding limits a spiritual principle to a natural condition. Tithing was never designed to be dependent on abundance. It was designed to demonstrate trust. It is not merely about giving from what you have earned. It is about honoring a higher source, regardless of what your current situation looks like. When there is no job, the natural reasoning immediately says, there is nothing to give, and from a purely logical standpoint, that seems correct. But faith does not operate on logic alone. Faith recognizes that even in moments of lack, there is always something that can be offered, whether it is time, obedience, resources already in your hand, or even a step taken in trust when it seems uncomfortable. The act itself is not measured by its size, but by the heart and the faith behind it. Too many people wait for overflow before they engage in giving, but the principle was never built on waiting. It was built on trusting. Waiting for abundance before acting in faith reverses the very order that unlocks provision. It is not abundance that produces faith-filled giving. It is faith-filled giving that opens the door for abundance to manifest in ways that cannot be explained by natural means. There is also a deeper truth that often goes unnoticed. Tithing is not about meeting a requirement. It is about maintaining a connection. It keeps your focus aligned with the reality that your provision does not originate from your effort alone. It reminds you that you are not self-sustained, even in seasons where it feels like everything depends on you. Without that reminder, it becomes easy to drift into fear, anxiety, and the pressure of trying to control outcomes that were never meant to be controlled by human strength. In seasons without income, the temptation is to withdraw, to hold tightly to whatever is left, and to operate from a mindset of scarcity. But scarcity thinking closes doors internally long before anything changes externally. It narrows vision, limits expectation, and creates a cycle where fear dictates decisions. Faith, on the other hand, keeps the heart open, keeps expectation alive, and allows you to remain connected to a flow that is not determined by what you see in your hands. This is where the true test of trust begins. It is easy to say that provision comes from a higher source when everything is flowing smoothly, but it is in the absence of visible supply that your belief is revealed. Do you still honor that source when the numbers do not add up? Do you still act in alignment with that principle when it feels inconvenient or even risky? These are the moments that define whether faith is just a concept or a living force in your life. You must also understand that giving in faith is not limited to money alone. It can be expressed in multiple forms: serving others, showing kindness, using your skills to bless someone, or stepping out in obedience when prompted. These acts carry the same spiritual weight because they come from the same root, trust. And when trust is present, it activates a system that operates beyond human calculation. The mindset that says, "I will give when I have more," keeps you tied to a cycle where giving is always postponed. But the mindset that says, "I trust even now," positions you differently. It shifts your focus from what is missing to what is possible. It moves you from a place of fear into a place of expectation. And in that position, you are no longer waiting for circumstances to change before you act. You are acting in a way that allows circumstances to change. As this understanding deepens, the act of tithing transforms from an obligation into a declaration. It becomes a statement that says, your confidence is not in what you can produce, but in what has already been promised. It declares that even when the natural evidence is lacking, your trust remains intact, and your expectation is not diminished by temporary conditions. Divine provision does not respond to the condition of your surroundings. It responds to the position of your trust. Many people have been conditioned to believe that once circumstances improve, then provision will follow, but that way of thinking places control in the hands of external situations rather than in the unchanging source. Trust is the bridge that connects what is unseen to what becomes visible, and without that bridge, even the greatest promises remain out of reach in practical experience. When circumstances look unstable, the natural reaction is to analyze, calculate, and try to predict outcomes based on visible patterns. But divine provision does not follow predictable human patterns. It is not limited by timing location, or method. It can show up in ways that defy logic, ways that bypass systems, and ways that no amount of planning could have produced. The moment you anchor your expectation in circumstances, you restrict the flow to what those circumstances can support. But when your expectation is anchored in trust, you open the door to possibilities that go far beyond what you can currently see. There is a subtle shift that must take place within, moving from dependence on evidence to dependence on assurance. Evidence appeals to the senses. Assurance is rooted in conviction. Evidence says, I will believe when I see, but trust says, I believe and therefore I will see. This shift is not always comfortable because it requires letting go of the need to control outcomes. It requires releasing the constant urge to figure everything out before taking a step forward. But it is in that release that a greater flow begins to operate. Many times, people unknowingly interrupt the flow of provision because they keep checking their circumstances for confirmation. They measure their progress by what has changed externally, and when they do not see immediate results, doubt begins to creep in. But trust is not strengthened by constant evaluation of circumstances. It is strengthened by consistency in belief, regardless of what is happening around you. When you continue to stand firm, even when nothing seems to be shifting, you are establishing a foundation that cannot be shaken by temporary conditions. Provision often begins to move in subtle ways before it becomes obvious. It may start as an idea, a connection, an unexpected opportunity, or a sudden direction that seems small at first. If you are only looking for dramatic change, you might overlook these beginnings. Trust allows you to recognize these moments and respond to them, even when they do not appear significant at the time. What seems small can carry within it the seed of something far greater. Another important aspect is understanding that trust is expressed through action. It is not passive agreement or hopeful thinking. It is demonstrated in how you speak, how you decide, and how you move forward. When trust is active, it shapes your responses. You stop speaking from fear, and you begin to speak from expectation. You stop making decisions based solely on limitation, and you begin to move with a sense of confidence that is not tied to current conditions. Circumstances will always try to present a narrative. They will tell you what is possible, what is not, what is likely, and what is out of reach. But that narrative is based on what is visible, and what is visible is subject to change. Trust connects you to something that is not subject to change. It aligns you with a reality that exists beyond the natural realm, and from that place, provision flows in ways that cannot be predicted or contained by external situations. When this becomes real to you, the pressure begins to lift. You are no longer striving to force outcomes or manipulate situations to make things work. Instead, you are positioned to receive, to recognize, and to respond. You become aware that provision is not something you have to chase. It is something that flows as you remain aligned with trust. And in that alignment, even when circumstances appear uncertain, there is an inner stability that keeps you grounded, expectant, and ready for what is unfolding beyond what you can currently see. Words are never empty. They carry direction, weight, and influence over the course of your life. What you continually say, especially in moments of pressure, begins to shape what you expect, and what you expect begins to influence what you experience. Many underestimate the power of their own voice, treating words as reactions rather than recognizing them as forces that either align with provision or resist it. In seasons where there is no job, no visible income, and no clear path forward, the words you speak become even more critical because they reveal what you truly believe beneath the surface. It is easy to let circumstances dictate speech. When things look uncertain, the natural tendency is to speak what is seen. There is nothing coming in. I don't know how I will make it. Everything is closed. These statements may feel honest, but they also reinforce limitation. Repeated often enough, they begin to settle into the mind as accepted truth. And once something is accepted internally, it begins to influence decisions, actions, and expectations. Words spoken in fear do not remain isolated. They create an environment where doubt grows stronger and confidence becomes harder to maintain. There is a different approach, one that requires intentionality. Instead of allowing circumstances to shape your words, you begin to let your words shape how you face your circumstances. This does not mean ignoring reality, but it does mean refusing to give limitation the final authority. You choose to speak in alignment with what you believe is possible beyond what is currently visible. When you declare that provision is available, that doors are opening, and that opportunities are being prepared, you are not simply repeating phrases. You are reinforcing a mindset that keeps you open and expectant. The mind follows the direction of speech more than most realize. What you consistently say becomes what you consistently think, and what you consistently think becomes the lens through which you interpret everything around you. If your words are filled with doubt, the mind will begin to filter every situation through that doubt. Opportunities may pass by unnoticed because they do not match the expectation that has been built through negative speech. But when your words are filled with confidence and expectation, the mind becomes alert to possibilities. It begins to recognize openings that would have otherwise been ignored. There is also an internal effect that takes place when you choose your words carefully. Speaking with intention strengthens your inner stability. It creates a sense of control, not over external events, but over your internal response to those events. Instead of being carried by every shift in circumstance, you remain anchored. Your words become a steadying force, helping you maintain clarity, even when things around you seem uncertain. At the same time, words influence action. When you speak from a place of fear, your actions tend to follow that fear. You hesitate, you withdraw, you avoid taking steps that might lead to change. But when your words reflect expectation, your actions begin to align with that expectation. You become more willing to step forward, to explore opportunities, to engage with possibilities that require initiative. In this way, your words do not just affect how you feel, they shape what you do. It is important to recognize that this is not about pretending or denying challenges. Challenges are real, and they must be faced. But how you speak about them determines whether they remain obstacles or become stepping stones. Words that magnify difficulty make it harder to move forward, while words that focus on possibility create space for solutions to emerge. The difference is not in the situation itself, but in the perspective that is reinforced through speech. Consistency is key in this process. Speaking positively once or twice will not override a pattern of negative thinking that has been built over time. It requires repetition, intention, and awareness. You begin to notice your default responses and gradually replace them with words that align with where you want to go rather than where you currently are. Over time, this shift becomes more natural, and the internal environment begins to change. As this change takes root, something begins to happen beneath the surface. Confidence grows, not because everything has changed externally, but because your internal foundation has become stronger. You are no longer as easily shaken by what you see, because your words have established a different perspective within you. And from that place, you are better positioned to recognize, receive, and respond to opportunities that align with the provision you have been expecting. Faith is not proven when everything is visible. It is revealed when nothing is. Anyone can move when the path is clear, when resources are in hand, and when outcomes seem guaranteed. But faith steps forward when there is no visible evidence to support the decision. It does not wait for confirmation from the natural world before it acts. Instead, it moves based on an inner conviction that what is not yet seen is already in motion. In seasons where there is no job, no steady income, and no predictable flow, the pressure to remain still becomes intense. The mind begins to suggest that action should be postponed until something changes, until clarity comes, until resources appear. But faith does not operate by waiting for perfect conditions. If it did, it would never move at all. Faith understands that movement itself is often the catalyst that brings unseen provision into the visible realm. There is a difference between reckless action and faith-filled action. Recklessness ignores wisdom, but faith responds to direction, even when that direction does not make complete sense in the moment. It may prompt you to take small steps, reaching out to someone, pursuing an idea, offering help where there is no immediate return, or preparing for opportunities that have not yet appeared. These actions may seem insignificant or even unnecessary from a natural standpoint, but they carry weight because they are rooted in trust rather than certainty. The invisible realm is not empty, it is active. Just because something cannot be seen does not mean it is not already unfolding. Faith recognizes this activity and aligns with it. It does not demand immediate proof before taking a step. Instead, it moves with the understanding that each step taken in trust creates alignment with what is already being prepared behind the scenes. What appears to be nothing is often a setup for something that is still forming. Many times, people miss opportunities not because they are unavailable, but because they are waiting for them to become obvious. They expect provision to arrive fully formed, clearly labeled, and immediately beneficial. But often it begins in seed form, small, unimpressive, and easy to overlook. Faith does not dismiss these beginnings. It recognizes potential where others see insignificance. It treats small steps as meaningful and engages with them as if they carry something greater within them. Action driven by faith also reshapes your internal state. It breaks the cycle of passivity and replaces it with momentum. When you begin to move, even in small ways, it shifts your focus from what is lacking to what is possible. It engages your mind, your creativity, and your awareness. You become more attentive, more responsive, and more open to direction. Instead of being stuck in analysis, you enter into participation. There is also a level of courage required in this kind of action. Moving without visible assurance can feel uncomfortable. It challenges the need for control and the desire for guarantees, but courage grows as it is exercised. Each step taken in trust strengthens your confidence, not in your own ability to predict outcomes, but in your ability to respond regardless of what those outcomes may be. Over time, this builds a resilience that is not easily shaken by uncertainty. It is important to understand that faith does not eliminate wisdom or planning. It simply refuses to be limited by the absence of complete information. You still think, you still consider, but you do not allow the lack of visible resources to stop you from moving forward when there is a clear sense of direction. You learn to act with both awareness and trust, combining practical steps with an inner conviction that goes beyond what can be measured. As you continue to act in this way, patterns begin to emerge. What once seemed uncertain starts to connect. Opportunities that appeared unrelated begin to align. Steps that felt small begin to reveal their purpose. This unfolding is not always immediate, but it is consistent. Faith-driven action positions you within the flow of something greater, something that cannot be accessed by waiting alone. Over time, you begin to see that what you once considered invisible was never truly absent. It was simply not yet revealed, and your willingness to act before seeing it fully is what allowed it to take shape. In your experience, obedience often seems simple when instructions align with comfort, but its true depth is revealed when it asks for something that stretches beyond what feels reasonable. It is one thing to follow direction when the outcome is clear and the path is easy to understand, but it is something entirely different to respond when there is no visible guarantee attached to the step you are being prompted to take. In moments like these, obedience becomes less about logic and more about alignment, less about understanding every detail and more about trusting the one who sees beyond what you can perceive. There are doors that effort alone cannot open, paths that skill cannot create, and opportunities that no amount of striving can produce. These doors respond to something deeper than human ability. They respond to alignment. When you move in obedience, even when the instruction feels small or unrelated to your immediate need, you position yourself in a place where things begin to shift in ways that are not directly tied to your actions. It is not always the action itself that produces the result. It is the alignment created through that action that opens the way. Many times, the mind tries to evaluate obedience based on visible return. It asks, "What will this lead to?" or "How will this solve my problem?" When those questions cannot be answered clearly, hesitation begins to rise. But obedience is not driven by visible outcomes. It is driven by trust in direction. It understands that not every step will reveal its purpose immediately. Some steps are preparatory. Some are positioning. Some are simply about creating the right alignment for what is yet to come. In seasons where there is no job or steady income, obedience can feel even more challenging because every decision seems to carry weight. The pressure to make the right move increases, and the desire to control outcomes becomes stronger. But control often leads to limitation, while obedience leads to expansion. When you rely solely on your own reasoning, you are confined to what you can see and calculate. But when you respond to direction beyond your own understanding, you step into a flow that is not restricted by your current knowledge or resources. Obedience also has a way of connecting you to the right people, the right environments, and the right moments. What may seem like a simple action, going somewhere, reaching out, offering help, or following a quiet prompting, can place you in the exact position where something significant unfolds. These connections are not always predictable. They do not always follow a logical sequence, but they are often the turning points that shift everything. There is also a refining aspect to obedience. It challenges self-reliance and replaces it with dependence on something greater. It exposes areas where fear may still be influencing decisions and invites you to move beyond that fear. Each time you choose to obey, despite uncertainty, you strengthen your ability to trust. You become less dependent on external validation and more anchored in internal conviction. It is important to recognize that delayed understanding does not mean misdirection. Just because you do not immediately see the result of a step does not mean it was unnecessary. Many outcomes are the result of a series of actions that only make sense when viewed together. A single act of obedience may not appear to change much on its own, but it can be a crucial part of a larger process that is unfolding over time. As you continue to respond in obedience, a pattern begins to form. You start to notice that certain steps lead to unexpected openings, that certain decisions create momentum where there was none before. This awareness builds confidence, not in your ability to predict, but in your willingness to follow. You begin to move with a sense of expectation, knowing that each step, no matter how small it seems, has the potential to unlock something beyond what you can currently see. Over time, obedience shifts from being something you struggle with to something you lean into. It becomes a natural response rather than a forced decision. You no longer wait for complete clarity before moving. You respond to the direction you have, trusting that clarity will increase as you go. And in that movement, doors begin to open that could not have been accessed any other way. When you step back and look at the whole picture, a powerful truth begins to emerge. Provision was never meant to be tied to a paycheck, a position, or a predictable system. What seemed like loss was never the end of supply, only the removal of a familiar channel. And in that space where the natural support disappears, a deeper understanding begins to take root, one that shifts your focus from what you can see to what has always been working behind the scenes. You begin to realize that trust carries more weight than circumstances, that your words shape more than your emotions, and that your actions, even the smallest ones, can align you with something far greater than your current situation. What once felt like limitation starts to become an invitation to operate differently, to think beyond the visible, and to engage with a system that is not bound by human conditions. There is a strengthening that happens through this process. Fear loses its authority, hesitation gives way to movement, and uncertainty no longer holds the same power over your decisions. You stop waiting for everything to make sense before you move, and instead you begin to move with confidence, knowing that clarity often follows obedience not the other way around. What once appeared as lack begins to reveal itself as redirection. What once felt like being stuck begins to show signs of positioning. And as you continue to trust, speak, act, and respond with intention, you become more aware that provision is not something distant or delayed. It is something that flows as you remain aligned with the principles that govern it. You are no longer confined to what you have lost, because your expectation is no longer rooted there. Instead, it is anchored in something unchanging, something unlimited, something that does not fluctuate with circumstances. And from that place, a quiet confidence rises within you, a confidence that does not depend on visible evidence, but on a settled knowing that what you need is already in motion, already prepared, and already finding its way to you through channels you may not yet see,